Hi, I'm Shruti, and I am the coordinator of the Young Activist Network for Abortion Advocacy called YANAA. YANAA is an international network by and for young people that focuses on activism and advocacy in relation to safe abortion. YANAA is hosted by the International Campaign for Women's Right to Safe Abortion, and the network has about 140 youth activists as members in its network. YANAA network aims to highlight the lack of evidence about the need for abortion, especially among young girls, and promote universal access to safe abortion as a health and human rights issue. We aim to promote intergenerational dialogue between feminists on safe abortion activism and develop a platform for young people to share their specific issues. We aim to promote the leadership of young feminists on the abortion issue and support participation of young leaders on global platforms, as well as we aim to campaign for the decriminalization of abortion with a specific focus on how laws and policies are affecting young people. Today's roundtable discussion is titled Young People's Activism and Safe Abortion. I am the moderator for the roundtable discussion. To set the context, it needs to be said, we are witnessing multiple uncertainties and crises in the world today. Global pandemic, climate crisis, wars, fundamentalism, authoritarianism, shrinking spaces for citizen participation, backlash against the human rights activists, internet shutdowns, and censorship by big tech companies, etc. on social media. Global inequalities in the world due to political, social, and economic factors is another reality. In 2019, 16% of the total population was in the age group of 15 to 24. The young people who are witnessing the crisis of today are also the leaders for social change in the society. They are the leaders of feminist movements, reproductive justice and climate justice movements, and the queer movement. Their activism on social justice work is important to build a fair and equal world. For the roundtable discussion, I have with me 4 speakers today who are my contemporaries and are young abortion right activists working on the same principles and values of strengthening social justice movements. They work with women and other young people in their regions to strengthen their access to safe abortion. We're going to deep dive into learning more about their work, the contexts in which they work, etc. Given the critical moment that we are at of the danger of Roe v. Wade judgment being overturned, the question is how we can strategize more and more to protect abortion rights. We have a lot to talk about, so let me just begin with introducing them. The first speaker today is Serena Jasait. Serena is from the Philippines. She's the networking officer of Women's Global Network for Reproductive Rights. WGNRR is a global network that builds and strengthens movements for sexual and reproductive health, rights, and justice. As the networking officer, she coordinates WGNRR's networking and movement strengthening work in the Philippines, particularly on the campaign to decriminalize abortion in the Philippines. Next speaker is Christina Maya Holtrop. Christina is from rural Washington state in the Pacific Northwest of the US. She began her activism by founding a regional action council for Planned Parenthood in her small hometown. She has served as a board member of the statewide advocacy nonprofit Pro-Choice Washington. Christina is now finishing a master's degree in public policy and human development from the United Nations University, Merit, in the Netherlands, and is writing her thesis on the association between abortion access and poverty in the US. The next speaker is Vanessa. Vanessa is a feminist activist from Ecuador. She is working with an NGO called Sendas, which specializes in the work of promoting human rights, focused on women, girls, boys, adolescents, the right of LGBTIQ+ population, sexual and reproductive health rights. The next speaker is Beatrice Rotoli. Beatrice is a feminist advocate for sexual and reproductive rights of young women and their intersectionalities. Born in Brazil and currently living in Italy, she is the coordinator of the European Youth Network on Sexual and Reproductive Rights, working with and for young people on issues such as meaningful youth participation and access to SRHR services. Beatrice holds a master's degree in human rights and multi-level governance, for which she has developed her thesis in the access of safe abortion care for asylum seekers and refugee women in Italy. Thank you all four of you for joining me today. We're going to flash the first set of questions for the discussion. And I would like you to talk about some of the key challenges that young people face in your country or your region, especially in the context of safe abortion, as well as how do you overcome these challenges and what are the strategies that your organization has to work on safe abortion. So if I can request Serena to begin, please.
Yes, thank you so much, Luti. I hope that I'm very much audible today. And hello to my fellow speakers and to our interpreters and to Garima. So to answer those questions, well, in the Philippines, abortion is highly restrictive. And despite the passage of the Responsible Parenthood and Reproductive Health Law in 2012, we call it RPRH law, young people, especially minors, are still given very limited access to sexual and reproductive health information and services. And even the comprehensive sexuality education, or CSE, we call it CSE here in the Philippines, is yet to be fully implemented. So these legal barriers hinder young people from fully exercising their right to sexual and reproductive health. Furthermore, when young people assert their right to access information and services, they are stigmatized and judged, especially by the older generation. So it's still happening even now in the Philippines. In effect, young people feel ashamed, guilty, scared, and discriminated. And this stigmatization is also further perpetuated when young people need access for safe abortion. And since abortion is also highly restricted here in the Philippines, even information on how to get reliable information about this is also not really familiar to the young people who may need it. So young people who may need this service as a result of unintended pregnancies due to various factors, most of them actually, they say it's because of economic factors, or they have experienced sexual abuse, etc. Will also have to undergo risky methods, often the back alley abortions, which will endanger their life and may result in complications from unsafe abortion. The older generation would just advise young girls to continue their pregnancy despite the risks it may pose to them. Because here in the Philippines, since we're still very much surrounded by a religious belief, we still see carrying the fetus or giving birth as a sign of blessing, even though we know that some circumstances wouldn't really allow these kinds of situations for young people to be really good for them. So of course, with this situation, particularly stigma and religious opposition are still the main challenges on our advocacy for safe abortion rights. Because of the ingrained stigma on abortion in our culture that is mainly brought by religious and fundamentalist groups, the bigger population, including young people, still think that abortion is immoral or it's a sin, and thus stigma and the influence of the church also greatly affect the passage of the progressive laws on SRHR. So they really have a great hold to what laws should be passed, especially if it deals about the reproductive health or women's rights or even young people's rights. Presently, WGNRR ensures that safe abortion rights advocacy is also intersectional in its approach, that safe abortion rights advocacy is glared with the human rights lens as public health issue and also as a social justice issue. We also ensure that young people are also consulted, and they also are invited in every step of the way. So we really take note of young people's capacity to decide for themselves, and that we also ensure that community people, young people even, are also included in our activity so that we also get their input, their insights, and we also get to engage with them on a more on a deeper level, on a more personal level, so that we know how our advocacy and campaigns work would also actually fit to their language, to their present needs, and to the kinds of solution that they think are really fitting to their situation and to the situation of their fellow young people. And also, we also keep in touch with other advocates and supporters, just as much as we know that everyone who are at stake in this discussion and in this advocacy should also be consulted and also have participation to this advocacy. So I think that's it for me. Thank you.
You're muted, Shruti.
Oops, sorry, my bad. I'll pass the mic to you, Christina. Over to you, please.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm Christina. I'm American, but I'm currently living in Europe doing a master's degree. But let's see, abortion access in North America. Well, I'm sure we have all heard the news about Roe v. Wade potentially being overturned. But for those of you that have only heard bits and pieces of the situation, I can give a brief synopsis. So as of right now, the right to abortion up to viability is protected under federal law, thanks to a Supreme Court decision made in 1973 called Roe v. Wade. But the court now has a conservative supermajority due to appointments of 3 justices made by Donald Trump. And last December, they heard a case called Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization, which directly challenges this precedent. So there is the potential for Roe v. Wade to be completely overturned or pulled back severely, or a decision is expected to come out this month. So yeah, that's nerve-wracking. But abortion access in the US is very complicated because it varies even right now with Roe still protected at the federal level. It's varies widely by state, and it will vary even more by state. Like, it'll be night and day if Roe v. Wade is overturned, because what that means is that the decision will be passed down to the individual states to make whatever laws about abortion that they want to. I mean, Oklahoma just passed the first flat out abortion ban since the moment of conception, since Roe v. Wade. So yeah, the situation is bad and it's escalating. But I mean, the good news is plenty of abortion clinics will remain open, and well, like in blue states, and there's a huge abortion rights movement that will mobilize around this issue, and I'm not exactly sure what that will look like if Roe v. Wade is overturned, because we as Americans have taken this for granted ever since, I mean, that was 50 years ago, 1973 or almost. And it was during like the civil rights movement. Like, this was part of the gender justice and the racial justice that was part of this movement in the 60s and 70s. And we're just going backwards. So but yeah, if and when Roe v. Wade is overturned, the United States will look like a patchwork of abortion access, because some states will completely ban it, some will severely restrict it, some are passing abortion protections, and with anticipation of Roe v. Wade being overturned, because they know that they will get an influx of people seeking abortion care traveling to their state where they couldn't get it where they live. And analysts are predicting that if and when Roe v. Wade is overturned, approximately 26 out of the 50 states are likely to restrict or outright ban abortion. So that's the situation. And it's scary, but that's why we're here, right?
Thanks, Christina. Can I request Vanessa to please unmute and respond to the questions here? Can't hear you, Vanessa.
Hi.
Yeah, you are now audible.
Hi. ¿Cómo están? Buenos días con todos.
Hi, how is everyone? It's a pleasure. My name is Vanessa Kaisin. I would like to thank you for inviting me to this roundtable because I consider it's very important to join our voices globally, and it's very interesting because we recognize the stories that you're telling. So the situation in Ecuador, well, honestly, is a little complicated. It may be true that we had last year a law to approve abortion because of violations or rape. The Constitutional Court approved this. Then it went to the General Assembly to create a law, but the law that was approved is a very limiting law. So this demand had the purpose for that girls would not be forced to be mothers, and that people that are victims of rape or survivors of sexual abuse would not be forced to be mothers. We're not talking about I'd say a triple violation of rights. So the situation for activists and the feminist movement in Ecuador is concerning because we have a government that has neoliberal policies, and we have to say this because according to the state policies, the way the state works dictates how we do activism, even though Ecuador is a country that has policies and laws that defend rights and guarantee rights of all creatures. When they execute them, when they apply them, it becomes very complicated. Given the policies that we currently have, making these rights be met is very difficult when we have the government that we have. The government right now is always mentioning religion, and they have this bias. We know that at a global level, the religious part is what influences the population and people. So we have this bias that limits and violates women's rights or women's rights to decide. What we are doing as a feminist movement in Ecuador is to get organized, to get together, to continue working. We are doing something that is helped us to keep going for years. We have had a historic fight that, for example, allows us to be here talking before we weren't even able to do this. So something that we value very much is to have a voice. What we're doing right now is fundamental because these spaces are necessary to be able to relay this message to everyone, to say that we're here and we exist, and that's something that is used a lot in our feminism, that we are here in our bodies and in our territory, and we are defending collective rights because we go from the individual to the collective to generate something. As I said, in the feminist movement, we are doing this. We're organizing. We submitted some demands so that the law could comply with the court's ruling. This ruling is a broad, open ruling so that any survivor of sexual abuse could access abortion. In Ecuador, abortion has been legal since the 90s, so what we're doing is expanding. We have information campaigns, we have events where we provide workshops so more young people, teenagers, and activists can improve their way they express their voice. They can say why we defend this right, the right to a life with dignity, where all persons can live well and free of violence. So this is what we're saying here. We're not saying all women want to have an abortion. I feel that this is something that we find when we participate in spaces, but the reality is that all women should have the right to have an abortion. And there's women having abortions every day. They're dying because of unsafe or clandestine abortions. Because even if a state has policies that repress abortion, that does not mean that women will not access abortion. They will have unsafe abortions. And this means that they will continue dying through these unsafe practices. What the states have to do is comply the role of guaranteeing rights, because abortion is a right. It's access to public health. So I believe that for now, this is what I would share. Thank you.
Thanks, Vanessa. Can I please request Beatrice to unmute and yeah.
Yes. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you very much for creating this opportunity for us to speak and be heard. And yeah, I'm very happy to be present. Well, I will share two perspectives for these proposed questions. The first one is through my experience as a Brazilian living in Brazil, and the second one as a migrant in Italy. So in Brazil, the first main challenge we face is the law. Once it is only legal to have a safe abortion in case the health of the mother is under risk, or if the pregnancy is a result of a sexual assault. And even in these cases, there are almost no information on the abortion procedure itself. So how it works, if you're going to have a pill, if you're going to have a surgery. And we also don't have information on how to have access to this. And it's also known that these cases can take a lot of time to have a verdict issue on whether a person can have an abortion or not, affecting, of course, the time frame you can have the abortion under the law. Now, talking specifically about young people, it is important to mention that in Brazil, there's also a huge lack of sexuality education that influences in the ability of young people taking informed decisions. So there's also a lot of stigma associated to this topic, and tons and tons and tons of absurd fake news addressed to parents for them to prevent this information to get to their children. Then there are many young women who get pregnant, and with no information and no access to safe abortion care. There are several cases of people who search for unsafe abortion services, some of them dying, and some of them suffering its consequences. But there is a group that has actually access to the services that are the white rich women. They are part of some bubbles, and they still can find gaps in the system and pay for safer abortion procedures, although they still being illegal. I would also like to point out the problem of some religious universities that are very big in Brazil, not even teaching their medical students how to perform an abortion. Actually, not even allowing them to talk about this topic inside the university. So who can perform safe abortions in the future? Who will not only have the knowledge of the technique, but also be able to provide a service that is accessible for young people, for example, or without the reproduction of stigmas. In addition, people who are activists for abortion rights are constantly investigated by the police. And talking about this issue can be very hard in the current moment in Brazil, as religious extremists are in the power and they incentivize a lot of violence against any people who has different thoughts from them. Finally, I would also like to add my perspective of a migrant woman in Italy, where abortion is legal until 90 days of gestation. Just to a little bit of background, coming from Brazil, I always had the impression that being in Europe, I would have the right over my body respected. I thought abortion would be easily accessible with open-minded people performing abortion with a lot of respect. But for my shock, I discovered that in Italy, there are also several barriers, some of them being the conscientious objection when healthcare professionals can deny performing an abortion, with some Italy's regions having more than 85% of doctors claiming this. So very hard to find a doctor who will perform an abortion. Also, a mandatory waiting period for women to be sure of their decisions exists. And many administrative barriers come to place, like one doctor passing to the other that will pass to the other, and you will need to sign this paper and you will need to send this paper somewhere, you know, many administrative things to do. And apart from that, there is a lot of very unclear information. They don't address exactly the service, so you can be quite lost. And on top of that, migrant women additionally suffer with a lack of clear policies to migrant women specifically. There's also language gaps from documents to services, a lack of cultural mediators, and a lot of stigma and discrimination, with some doctors even deciding if one will have an abortion or not based on the patient's religion or nationality. So if you're a Muslim, for example, a doctor can simply decide not to provide you a service because they think your religion will not allow. Therefore, sustaining a power relation where women are not even consulted about what they want for their body. In Italy, I found even more difficult to advocate for abortion rights because they will not only hear a migrant woman, but also information can be so hard to be found that sometimes it's even hard to find to whom I would make my requests. And this is due to each region in Italy being regulated by their own systems. So if you move inside Italy, you will have lots of difficulties to find not only information, but who can you can address your needs. So just to add how I think these challenges can be overcome, I propose 2 ideas, and the first one is to inform the population in very creative ways, including building networks for this matter, and especially targeting intersectional groups that are commonly marginalized. So produce specific content for certain groups, to certain groups. So for example, young people producing content to young people, and through that change the center of power to informed people. In UACT, the organization I'm part of, we have recently done a workshop on giving the mic to underrepresented groups to discuss sexual and reproductive health and rights, and working with and for young people on issues such as disabilities and sexual and reproductive health and rights, decolonizing a sorry jar, and also countering harmful practices. I also think it's necessary to train the politicians and policymakers and also the healthcare providers to center women's needs in their services, and to also provide the accessible information that we need and services and communication without stigma. And also include young people and marginalized groups as advisors and or decision makers of these activities. Thank you.
Thanks, Beatrice. I am quickly going to summarize some of the things that you all highlighted. I think one of the things that everybody talked about is the legal challenges and policy challenges, that the laws are very restrictive and it is only under certain circumstances that abortion is accessible. So the laws on abortion are one of the biggest challenges. And I think all of you also kind of touched upon religious challenges and how religion can influence people's mindsets, and how religion can actually stigmatize abortion, because of which a lot of people may fear, especially young people may fear accessing abortion. The other thing that you all talked about is also comprehensive sexuality education, which is not available to young people. And a lot of them also do not have information related to abortion where they can access safe abortion from, and that may lead to more deaths. I think one of the other interesting thing was around absurd fake news that gets circulated and gets a lot of traction, especially among young people. So we need to actually find out ways to provide correct information, and at a scale at which fake news actually gets circulated, because as we all know, fake news does get circulated at mass scale. The other interesting thing, I think, was about service provision and the scarcity of service providers not getting training for providing safe abortion, and that may lead to young people accessing unsafe abortion, etc. I think one of the things that was highlighted was also about intersectionality and how access to safe abortion is limited to only a certain class of people in different countries. And poor women, for example, or Muslim women, due to power imbalances in society, may not be able to access safe abortion. And I think one other thing that Beatrice, you talked about in the end was about decolonizing SRHR. So if possible, I would also like you to talk a little bit more about that later. But I think that is one interesting aspect of advocacy, that how do we decolonize SRHR? So that was the first round of conversation. We can move to the next round of conversation, and we have the next set of questions for discussion. So if you can talk about how the internet and social media is used in your activism, and what would be your demands for making social media and the internet safer space for abortion rights activism, especially in a context where we know a lot of young people are using more and more internet and social media. And the next round of question is about the US Supreme Court overturning the Roe v. Wade judgment and how that might impact your work in your region or your country, as well as young people's rights in your country. So yeah, with that, I will pass it on to Serena once again. Over to you.
Thank you again, Shruti. So, answering the first question, actually beginning the pandemic, WGNRR has also started adapting and maximizing so the features of social media in our activism. We also acknowledge the digital divide that the technology has created when the world shifted online, but we have also seen the efficiency and help of social media and the internet in general to widen our reach and engagement in terms of the diversity and geographic locations of our target audience. However, the maximization of the digital technology, social media in particular, poses a great threat to the privacy, safety, and security of advocates and supporters. So on our end, and this is also based on our personal experience, social media companies should also allow safe abortion rights advocates and supporters to express and publicize their posts, works, and contents by revisiting their ad policies, which ban any post related to abortion. Banning and preventing ad boosting on abortion, particularly on Facebook, which we personally experience as well. Like, we really cannot boost any post once Facebook sees a word about abortion, a key term about abortion. And so we are really having a difficult time to really widen also our target and the engagement with our with the public. Just so Facebook doesn't want any information about about abortion to be boosted online. So we really call on that social media companies be more impartial and also be more supportive of these kinds of advocacies, because if this is not prevented, or if this will still be allowed to happen, Facebook in particular will just further contribute to the stigma created around abortion. It is also important that the safe abortion rights movement should create stronger digital security measures to prevent any attacks from the opposition. And I think part of the digital security trainings or workshops would also include how to identify fake news or misinformation or disinformation. We are also very much experiencing here in the Philippines. There's so many disinformation and misinformation posts, not only on our political climate, but also on information even on sexual and reproductive health and rights. And we know for a fact that if a company like Facebook will not allow us to publicize our post and to widen our engagement and reach to our audience, then it would likely be that people will still be disinformed or misinformed about the facts and the evidence-based information and data about abortion. And yeah, this is really something that we should also be able to take note of, and something that we also have to work on our movement building and solidarity, solidarity building and networking. So just like what I said, digital security training and workshops should allow cross-regional participation that will also emphasize these kinds of concerns, and that we also see it as an effective way also to protect advocates and supporters and foster greater solidarity and security measures among all regions and participants. So that's all on my end. For the internet and social media and activism. Should I go to the next question? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so well, actually, with this one, I can also largely relate to what Christina shared about the possible overturning of the U.S. Supreme Court on Roe versus Wade case. We also acknowledge it here in the Philippines, especially in WGNRR, that it might negatively impact. Actually, not only in the Philippines, but globally, we are already like seeing how this would really negatively affect the safe abortion rights advocacy around the globe. In particular, funding for advocacy work with focus on abortion rights can be hugely affected, greatly impacting how local safe abortion advocates, like here, our advocates and supporters here in the Philippines, would have to move around the restrictions, stigma, and the meager resources that we really get to push forward to progress our safe abortion rights work. And it's really difficult, especially in a very restrictive setting with a really huge stigma around this issue. So narrowing on the Philippines' current campaign to decriminalize abortion, if the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade, we are looking at probably conservative groups and those that are opposing abortion in the Philippines would have more power and confidence to use this ruling against the advocates and advocacy itself. And we are looking at how this would also negatively affect the public's perception and the stance of policymakers. So again, it would also hugely affect our legal our policy advocacy measures and our work on the legislative side. This could also pose greater possibility of attacks, harassment, or threats to advocates and supporters, and would further perpetuate the stigma around abortion. So we know that we would still work on these concerns or on these challenges, but we also acknowledge that it would be so much challenging, and there would be some added difficulty to our work. So additionally, young people would also find it difficult to even talk about abortion for fear of being judged or stigmatized. All the more if they wanted to be part of this cause, because just hearing abortion would really entail a lot of negative connotation. And with this global issue that is really is really concerning everyone in the safe abortion advocacy rights, we know that this will really have a huge impact also in our work in the Philippines. Thank you.
Thanks, Zarina. Christina, over to you.
Thank you very much. I don't really know what more I could say about the second question, but I'll start with how the internet and social media can be used in this work and in abortion activism. Well, firstly, you know, if someone, a vulnerable pregnant person, can't get support or information or care from their doctors or even their community, social media and the internet are, of course, the only resource they have, really. And this wasn't the case. Like the last time abortion was illegal in the US, like in the 70s, like people were getting abortions underground through like sketchy like doctors that they heard about from their friends, and it was like all underground. Like women would form like direct action groups and teach each other about like the female body, which a lot of people didn't educate themselves on back then, and still don't. But and they would like learn how to self-manage their abortions. And I mean, if all of that was going on back then we have an opportunity now to utilize social media and the internet to get information out there to those who need it, like reliable information. And now people can even order abortion pills online to be mailed to them, which is a huge advantage that we have in like, the medical breakthroughs in mifepristone and misoprostol since then have made abortion a lot easier and a lot easier to manage. So I have hope for that. On the flip side, the internet and social media is just a cesspool of misinformation, and it also fuels polarization. You know, I'm sure we've all gotten into a fight on the internet where people are just angry on Twitter, and there are so many different myths about abortion that just fester on the internet and on social media, and everyone's just caught up in this fight, and nobody like takes the time to fact check what they're saying. Also, some posts have been removed from social media platforms related to abortion. So overall, I think the internet is definitely a net positive for this movement. But yeah, there are some challenges with that still. And how does the US Supreme Court overturn? I mean, that is my region, but I will say that in addition to, you know, the legal ramifications, it also just emboldens the anti-abortion movement and contributes to the stigma of abortion. And it it's a slap in the face to women, really. And yeah, I'll just echo what you said about that in terms of the social attitudes about it, in addition to the legal consequences. Thank you.
Thanks, Christina. Vanessa, over to you, please.
Les estaba escuchando con atención.
I
Y
was paying attention to what you're saying, and I was thinking,
Ay, no sabía
sorry about that.
Estaba pensando justo en las
So I was
redes sociales
thinking about the
y
answers that you gave,
sobre el
and
uso de las redes
I
sociales
feel that the use of social media for us as a movement is important. It's fundamental because indeed we can get to more people and more spaces. This in Sendas we work with communicational campaigns, and I'm gonna mix this to the other question. I'm gonna answer both questions at the same time because I feel they're related. We find out about what is happening with the court and Roe v. Wade specifically because of social media. So we can have the strength, we can join the movement, and we can sort of participate virtually, which is something fundamental. There are many campaigns that exist through social media, and there are demands that are heard because of the pressure that we create in social media, where we're there, we're saying that we're here, we're present, and we're not going to shut up. There isn't a way to shut us up. And I also think that because we had a education process about the causal health, so in Ecuador, abortion is legal if it affects your health. So in this workshop, one of our facilitators taught us something that I hadn't seen before. This was in February, in how anti-rights groups study the feminist movement. They have the resources to do it. And we said this is a matter of resources. If we want to be activated, if we want to be present, we need resources. So in Sendas, we just signed a 10-year project or agreement with PPFA. So these resources allow us to have these educational processes. But what I was trying to say is that we had an analysis of how the anti-rights movement studies what we do and what we say, and they have in YouTube, I think there's a video from Colombia, and this is an anti-rights groups that is using the language and it's using the expressions that we use in the feminist movement. They even copied our colors, and how we have to pay attention to this and take care of not confusing the work we do in social media. Even though there's those of us who have the social education that can recognize the fake news or this false news, how do we help the people who are getting confused, who are not clear on the fact that abortion is a public health issue? It is a guarantee that the state should give, and that abortion is something that should be addressed by every state in every region, so that women stop dying, so that girls stop being forced to be mothers. So this is the noise that I'm leaving behind of how do we make sure that the work that we do in our social media is not confused with the work that the anti-rights groups are doing. So I would ask you to check the pages of our organization, Send Us, in social media, so that you can see the work that we do and how we try to create an understandable language for everyone. And something else that is very important that was mentioned by Christina is how now you can really buy the pills so that you can access the service. And I think this is a question maybe for later, but how do we guarantee this right? How internet can be used as an access to rights that sometimes, unfortunately, our states do not enforce. And to finish the question, how would Ecuador be affected by the overturning of Roe v. Wade? Well, it's gonna have global impact because, well, in Latin America, Argentina is a reference, but we do have a global reference of the US in terms of sexual and reproductive rights. So yes, it would have impact, but it's something that we already experience, and we already have governments that are repressive. And something that I wanted to mention because it's very important, how when activists speak our voice and we defend sexual and reproductive rights, how we are exposed and how the governments start profiling you. It may be true that you have your own decision and you speak your voice. The government repression or the state repression towards activists is very concerning. So we also have to consider this. How many people disappear? How many people have died because of this? So that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Vanessa. Some very important points you brought in here. Yes, over to you, Beatrice.
Thank you again. Well, the organization I work for also uses a lot of this online environment, which I believe is very useful since we have the chance to kind of play with youth-friendly information, and we can help to diminish the stigma, having this very light conversation with young people. And in regards to the demands for having this safer online environment, I think the first one is that fake news about abortion needs to be addressed. I think most of us is experiencing in our social media a message when you mention COVID that appears that you need to search for a trustful source to confirm the information you are reading. They will address you to the World Health Organization website. Why we don't have this with abortion topics? Why? If it's easy, because they have done this in what, less than 6 months that we had COVID going on. Why we don't have this when abortion, the abortion topic exists since the beginning of internet? So this would be very useful. The other thing is, again, I will discuss about us not being allowed to talk about abortion. Even when we just search about this topic in any social media, it will appear tons and tons of pro-life content and almost nothing on pro-choice content. This is not because we are not producing good content, but because the social media enterprises is silencing us. So it seems that they just choose to be against women's lives, and this needs to be changed. We need to be heard, we need to be able to speak, and we need to be able to search for information. Lastly, I also believe governments need to hand accountable institutions, organizations, movements, individuals that are spreading violent, stigmatized, and fake information about abortion on internet, because internet is not no one's land. So we need to handle people accountable for their actions. Now, regarding the decision on the United States, I think it definitely incentivizes backlash in my own country. I also think the United States is a reference to Brazil. And I think that the government will find this an ideal moment to take some of our rights, So I think this is very dangerous to create this moment. Apart from that, I think this also generates a general backlash on the discussion of sexual and reproductive rights, because abortion is not our only demand, but we need to keep discussing about this and again and again and again. So this is very tiring. We have much more to discuss. We have much more to explore. And finally, I also think this creates a very unhealthy environment for our mental health. We are always afraid that our rights will be taken away from nowhere. Like our rights are always in the edge. And we never know until when we will have our bodily autonomy respected or not. So yes, this decision affects all of us directly and indirectly.
Thanks, Beatrice. I think on the first question, to summarize what you all said, there's quite a bit. One of the important things that did come out is on polarization of information that we see on social media, that there are polarized sentiments, and of course what we see and what, for example, anti-rights movement people might be seeing is very different, and it is also based on search histories, etc. So I think that also contributes to polarization of views. And obviously there are a lot of threats, etc., that abortion rights activists might get on internet or social media. But also how big tech companies such as Facebook can sometimes censor some information. Information can be reported by anybody, and that might lead to shutting down certain accounts or censoring some posts, etc. The other thing on social media, like you all said, is about fake news. And fake news gets circulated really fast, and people are not always equipped to verify the information. So there needs to be more trainings for young people, for activists, to actually inform people how to verify news, how to check information if it is correct. And one of the other important things is, like Christina, you said, is about in the 70s when advocacy activism was happening, we did not have the internet, but today abortion pills are, being available online, and people can get it access. So that, I think, is one of the interesting things. And with something like the Roe v. Wade judgment being overturned, what will happen to that kind of access which is right now available online? That might also get impacted. And of course, social media has much larger outreach, and that is why it is probably very important for our work. And the language, etc., has to be youth friendly, can be more catchy for young people when we're talking to young people on social media. One of the interesting things that I think Vanessa said is that how to not confuse what anti-right movement is doing, and how to make sure that what messaging we are giving is not getting confused by their messages, because something like this can happen. And yeah, that can probably be counterintuitive for the movement. And profiling of the activist, of abortion right activists, is very easy now, with big tech companies or the government being also involved in the internet space. So safety of abortion right activists is also important. I think one of the interesting and most clear thing that comes in terms of the judgment being impacted in other parts of the world is that it is going to affect the social attitudes on abortion. And in scenario where the US is the referral point, that might have more long lasting impacts that we cannot probably tell right now. But social attitudes in other parts of the world, for example in Asia also, we are seeing this, that it might impact social attitudes of people. Yes, and with that, I think we can move to the last round of question. Wafa?
Sorry, it kicked me out. I think my connection is unstable. I'm back now. Can you see my screen?
Yes, yes, it's visible. Can you go to the next slide, please? So the last question is, what message you would like to give other young abortion right advocates? And we can go in the same order. Serena, over to you.
Okay, so well, as a young person, as all of us are, no, advocating for safe abortion rights as a young person is challenging. Is very much challenging. Like I started doing this advocacy, and I was learning a lot. But as the years go by, it really becomes more challenging. But it's also more fulfilling as a young person because I get the privilege and the opportunity to really be part of this advocacy, this work that most people either would not be aware of or would not be courageous enough to be part of it for their fear also for being stigmatized, etc. So we know that advocating for safe abortion rights, especially as a young person, is very challenging, especially at this point where laws are regressing and the opposition is really trying to make a dent or even destroy what we have done to progress women's rights and women's health. So, but I also would like to remind my fellow young people and young advocates that we always have to remember that the youth, the young people, is also now. We are the ones who will continue and sustain the fight to push for the change. And as young SRHR activists or as people who are also in this field, let's not forget how our passion, motivation, strength, experiences, challenges, difficulties, everything, and our dedication, years of dedication can actually contribute to the change that we want to see. We always say that the youth is the future, that the young people will always create the change that we want to be in the future. So we really have to we have to take care of them, protect them, and acknowledge their right for informed decisions. But we also have to remember that we are the now. So we have the strength and the energy and the opportunity to fight and to push forward. And yeah, that's all that I want to really say to our fellow young advocates. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. I echo that. Young people are leaders of today. So that needs to be said too. Christina, over to you.
Thank you. I have a couple of tips for young people. And I remember when I was young or younger, when I was like 19 or something, I was like, well, I'm very passionate about this, but it's just so depressing. Like, how could I make a career out of this? It's like, that would just be, it's so emotionally demanding. And the work that I got involved with was, I mean, I was working in accounting at the time. And so I did a fellowship with an organization that does advocacy for this issue. And I helped them by putting the skills that I had to work, which was like, I created a scorecard for all of the state legislatures in my state. And I was just doing like spreadsheet work and like, you know, from the comfort of my bedroom. Like, so you don't necessarily have to like be on the front lines and get yelled at by counter protesters all the time. Yeah, I would say find a gap that you can fill and fill that. The other thing I would say is to surround yourself with other pro-choice advocates, or at least people who support you, because that makes a world of a difference. I remember when I was volunteering for Planned Parenthood, it was just like a small activism like side thing that I did while I was working in accounting, but I organized a booth, just a booth at a farmer's market in my small hometown for Planned Parenthood, where we would just tell people, give them information and resources and hand out stickers and stuff. And there was a booth next to me that was very hostile, like the guy at the booth next to me. And I remember when I got there and I was first setting up, it was just me there. And I was like, oh, today is going to be so hard. But then the rest of my volunteers that I was managing showed up, and we talked about it together and we supported each other. And then that actually makes you feel so much better. So even if this work is very grueling and it's very depressing sometimes, and you feel sometimes powerless against everything that's going on, to just remember that we are the pro-choice majority and we're all working on this together.
Yes, thanks, Christina. Thanks for sharing your personal story as well. And of course, we are stronger together. So on that note, I'll pass it on to Vanessa, please.
Muchas gracias y voy a retomar.
Thank you very much. And I'll go to what Christina said. So I would say this: feminism and putting your body and your voice there, because it's as Christina said, it's time, it's energy, and something else that is very important in activism, something that personally I think is very important, is self-care. Self-care, to give ourselves time to feel, I mean, I have all of this in the outside, but I have to check how I'm doing inside. So if I feel that I'm doing well inside, that I can keep myself and keep fighting in these processes, that is important. There is a phrase by Dolores Aquango, which is one of the first Ecuadorian feminist. She was an indigenous leader, and she says that we are like the grass in the prairies that is taken out and keeps growing. So we are this, we are a network. We are here together in this virtual room right now. We are able to send this message. We are able to share our experiences with others. Is all fundamental and is important. I am not the only one in Ecuador doing activism. I have a network of sisters, of colleagues. And it's true, it depends on where we're at. Even though it may be true, my work right now is in an institutional organization, but at 17 and 16, I was on the streets. I was skipping university. I don't know how I got graduated, but it depends on where we're at and what we're doing, and that's where we see the contributions that we can give at that moment in our lives. So we know that what we do, it all adds up. If I share an image of the companion network in my country, I'm helping and I'm providing a message to other women and persons capable of giving birth. And this is what makes the difference from anti-group sites. We're defending a life with dignity, and we are defending all the persons capable of being pregnant, and we're supporting diversity, and we're going to continue expressing our voices. And I'm very happy again to have participated in this and to be able to have you hear how the southern part of the globe is doing, and also have love. revolutionary love. This is what maintains our processes. When you feel that you can't go anymore, you have to feel that you're not alone, because we're not alone. We have a network, we have people next to us. There's always someone that we can go to, write to, call. So we're not alone. We are a network. And actually, this is the logo of the Network for Women's Health in Latin America and the Caribbean, is to look for this support, this network that supports us. And any act adds up. And this is what helps us expand and reach. Thank you.
Thanks, Vanessa. You've put it very beautifully. And whatever you said in terms of mental health, emotional work that we do, sometimes having burnout, but also remembering self-love, self-care is equally important, as well as love in the movements are very important. So thanks for saying that. Over to you, Beatrice.
Thank you. I will also focus on mental health because I think it's something very important for the moment we are passing right now. So my message is for young people to continue believing in themselves and stay creative in their work, having fun when you can have fun, and balancing this with attention to their own mental health. Because if we are not healthy, we cannot advocate, and if we don't advocate, we are not able to fight structures of oppression. So on top of everything, take care of yourself to continue promoting change. Each one of us is very, very, very important to this fight. Thank you.
Thanks, Beatrice. I think with that, we end the round of the questions, but I think it was really interesting that we started from talking about challenges and what we are facing in our own regions, but to end on this note of love and solidarity and self-care. Thank you very much. We are going to put out the recording on YouTube soon, and we will do documentation in illustrations format with the recording, which will also be out soon. So I'm going to put off the recording right now.